Hi, I'm Colin Kelly Cook. Luna's around here somewhere. In my last video, we built this Catalogue app. Now, I didn't connect it to any data sources. I just put it into a collection. I'm currently working through a video where I'm going to connect it up to Dataverse. But I had a really great question come in from Kiva on my YouTube channel. So she's working with SharePoint Lists. Now, some guys are stuck working with SharePoint Lists. You don't have a premium license, which means you have to use SharePoint Lists. They're not great working with Power Apps, but things are possible. So I'm going to go through a video and just show you actually how would we connect this to SharePoint Lists. But Kiva also came up with a really good, interesting question. When I built this app, initially I just built it with work clothing types. So you can buy a hard hat, you can buy a set of gloves, you can buy some trousers, but obviously those come in different sizes. How do we handle that? How do we handle different sizes? Kiva also pointed out that for her scenario, each of those different sizes has an article number. Now this is like a background ID that's probably used for invoicing or for stock collection, so they know exactly where that item is and which item has been bought. So we can't do that with our current model. So we need to work out how are we going to implement an article number and different sizes into that Catalogue app, and we're going to use SharePoint Lists. Let's jump over. So the first thing I always do if I'm going to work with any sort of complexity in a Power App is I'll go out and actually do some drawing first. Now I actually do this on pen and paper sometimes. It's easier. This is Miro, which is great. You can just draw squares and connect them. It actually has some entity relational diagramming in it as well. So we're going to use this. This is the data model that I built into the app previously. We just had a name, description, category, cost, and then an image. Now what Kiva is asking is actually, we want to have a size for an item, and we want to have what Kiva calls an article number. And this is essentially just a unique ID. It's not the ID of the record. This is something that's unique to the company. So we need to be able to put that in there. We could just build the table like this. And yes, we could go and create an app based on this. However, the problem is for each size, we're going to have to repeat. We're going to have to repeat ourselves. We're going to have to put in image for every size. We're going to have to put in cost for every size. We're going to have to put in category for every size. So it's not really going to be scalable. It's going to repeat itself. It's not really the best way to do it, but there is a better way. So let's consider shifting it around like this. So we've still got our work clothing type. We've added no new columns to that. We've still got our name, description, category, cost, and image. But now we've added a second table. So this table actually tells us all the different sizes that we've got and the article number for each. It still has an ID because that's an ID on the table. In SharePoint Lists, it's a numeric 1 to however many items you've got in there. If you are using Dataverse, it's going to be a GUID. Then what we can do is we can relate those sizes to a work clothing type, meaning we only need to give the work clothing type, which is say gloves, one record. We can then relate multiple sizes to that record. Now I've added a couple of extra tables here. We've got purchases because once the items are purchased, we want these items to be copied over into a purchase. We want to know who purchased them, maybe give it a purchase item ID. We will give it a purchasing item ID, but maybe we could also give it like an invoice ID or something. We don't need to worry about that for now. The other thing I've also done just to show how we can scale out what I did is category here. I was just typing it in. I was just adding it to each of the items as I created them. But the truth is, again, that's something that's repeated. So we can make that a choice. So we can say there are choices that you can choose from. These are the different types of that work clothing type. So in SharePoint Lists, we can use choice columns. In Dataverse, we can also use choice columns. Now, there's a difference here that's worth pointing out. Why is this a table and this a choice? Now, they both could be tables. It's not a problem. There's many use cases for making them both tables. The priority here is because a choice is only got a single value, right? It's one choice. It's an accessory. It's work clothing. It's whatever it needs to be. Whereas work clothing choices, we have to have size, but also article number. So we've got two different properties on that record. So we have to make that one a table. This is a very simple data model, but it just kind of shows how we have to sometimes split things out and think about whether we've got different choices or different tables that relate to them. Now in SharePoint Lists, we get the choice of a lookup column. So we could make this a lookup column. I'm not going to do that. And the reason is in Power Apps, then it becomes very difficult to avoid delegation warnings. When we're also doing some complex lookup structures, it can be very difficult to use the lookup column to get back to the work clothing type. We have to write exponentially longer statements and lookups. So I'm actually just going to make this an integer, and I'm going to put the ID of the item into that table. So these are not directly related according to SharePoint, but we're building a relationship, and our app can define that relationship. You'll see in my coming video when we do this with Dataverse, those are actual relationships and we can connect them a lot easier. But hey, I said we're going to do this with SharePoint lists. We're going to do it with SharePoint lists. So here I've got my first SharePoint list. This is the work clothing type. So this is the top level. This is where only one of each of these items needs to exist. I've got safety vest, I've got my image, I've got my cost, I've got down to work shirt, I've got work gloves here. And you'll see my category column is now a choice field. So if we edit this field, there's a limited set of choices that we can choose from, meaning I don't have to multi-type them. I can't type footwear wrong twice and end up with two different categories in my app. So this is going to be a much more efficient way to have those single choice columns. My second list, this is the work clothing items. So these are the actual items that exist in my warehouse. So you could use actually even this for stock take and say how many are available to stop people from buying them. We're not going to go to the nth degree of how this could work. But for this, we've got a size, an article number, and then the work clothing type ID that it relates to. So here I've got 5, 6, 7 and an article number of 5, 6, and 7. And I've put work clothing type ID 3. So if we head back over to my work clothing types and show and hide the columns here, we get the auto-generated ID column. Drag this over to the left. Thank you, SharePoint. So you can see number 3 is work gloves. So I have not directly tied, but I've said your work clothing type ID 3, your work gloves. And then for the others, I've given medium small, which is the hard hat. And just for the sake of the demo, everything else is one size. Now I have created a purchases table. Again, I've put a title in, or the title comes with the SharePoint list. You can't get rid of it. I've actually created a lookup in there. I'm not actually going to use this table in the demo, but you get the idea. You can build multiple tables alongside this. So now we need to go to our Catalogue app and see how we rework this in. It's going to be a little bit more tricky than just building an app from scratch, but you'll get the differences between how a collection works and then how we have to rebake this for a SharePoint list. So now we're back in our lovely Catalogue app. The first thing we need to do is we need to add our data sources in. If you have or haven't seen the video, in my on start, I create just a collection. And in this collection, I'm just creating rows of records. So it's a flat structure. Just gaining from a collection. We need to switch this out now, and we're going to build it into the SharePoint list we just created. So we need to head over to our data on the left hand side, and we need to add data. These tables here are Dataverse tables, which again I'll show you in my next video. We need to get SharePoint tables in, so we come down to connectors and we click on SharePoint. Now again, in a normal business scenario, we should actually be using environment variables and connection references. This means that when we move it between environments, or we move it from one solution to another, we can actually change the connection reference. We can give it a different SharePoint list URL, and we can give it a different connection, which is the account that it connects to. I'll go into that in another video. For the purposes of this demo, we're just going to directly connect using my account. We've got the site here, so we can just go straight in, do work clothing types, work clothing items, and we'll bring in purchases anyway, even though we're actually not going to use it in this demo. So now we've got our lists here, we can start updating our app to include all of this data instead of our collection data. Categories. So the first thing we need to do is we need to sort our categories out. So these are now in a choice field. I'm not actually going to go and directly get the choices in this, because I don't want the choices to appear unless there's an item for that choice. There may be other choices which have no items. I don't want to confuse people by making them click on something that doesn't exist. So it's going to be fairly straightforward to switch this over. So we're currently using the collection. We need to change this to the work clothing types. And we've got an error. So now we just need to work through these errors. The schema of the SharePoint list is not the same as my collection was. So if we look at this error, it's saying the item that I'm trying to put in the table has a type that's not compatible with the table. And that's this record here. If you watch the previous video, you'll see what table does is it allows us to create a table with a record and then add some more records in. And what it's saying is this doesn't match what I'm trying to bring in here. And the reason for that is a choice is actually a record. There's a value here with a value record in it. So we actually have to, strangely, create a value that is a record as a property value of all. So it's a bit strange, but I'm basically saying this record has a value property, that property is a record, and the record has a text of all, and that's what these items actually look like inside this when it comes into Power Platform. Power Platform. Now our sort is wrong. So our sort is saying, right, I don't understand. Like, I can't sort it by value, and that's because value is actually a record. So what we're going to do is we can actually just change this. We can change it from sort by columns to sort, and it'll be value dot value. It's going to sort by the value dot value. So yeah, now we're seeing an error on the table itself. So this is working in that the items actually exist in the background. If we drop here, we've got an error. So the text is trying to get this item dot value. Now, as we just saw, it's not this item dot value anymore. It's actually this item dot value dot value. So there we go. So this is now coming from that SharePoint list instead of from the collection that's in the app itself. So that's categories done. On to the next bit. So our next big problem is the gallery itself. So this gallery is now trying to look up by the collection, and it's trying to use the current category, which is all, and it's saying I can't compare these types. This is an error, and that's because my category here, if we jump over, is actually a button, and on that on select it selects the gallery. Then in my gallery, the on select updates the context. So it updates the context of lock current category to this item dot value. But again, we know that actually that's going to be a record. So that's not going to work because my app thinks it's a string. So we need the value dot value. So we pop that in and we press the all button. So we can see that all is now working. We're getting the string. Go back to our gallery. So this should correct itself if we just copy and paste it back in. So it's working again now. But this is still getting the items from our collection. We need to change this collection, and actually we want to be getting them from our SharePoint list now. So work clothing types. So if it's all, we want to see all the work clothing types. If it's not, we want to filter the work clothing types where the current category equals work clothing types category. But again, remember this is actually a record. So we need to check it against the category dot value. We can still sort by cost because we still put that cost on there, and we've still got our sort order ascending or descending. This is actually working from our SharePoint list now. So let's just double check that. We can change to apparel, accessories, outerwear, and all. Good start. The only difference is now we can see there's some more errors here. So we just need to fix up some of these. So let's start working through these errors. So let's have a look at this first one. So this is my on select. So this is going to collect into my basket the items that the user is trying to purchase. Now, the reason it's getting confused is because across my app, col user basket items is actually coming from that collection. Now these items are in a slightly different schema. They're coming from a SharePoint list. We need to switch them over. Now, the easiest way to do this is just change the collection for now, because we need to start working through, and if we just have those errors, we have to work through everything until the scheme is fixed again. So if I just replace that now, when we press that, it's going to go into a new collection. We'll just work through the app and update the collections as we go so that we know we've done each one individually. We're still getting a lot of our features come in here. So for this button, I'm just going to move it out of the way so that we can access some of these. So this item name is the same, this item description is the same. We've got another error here. So this is trying to bring the category in. So again, we know this item category should be this item category dot value. Perfect. So we're almost there. Now, we're no longer purchasing the workwear item, right? We added this extra listing. It's actually this article number or size item that we need to create. So we need to give our users a way of selecting that item. So we need to put on our card here somewhere a list of the items that someone can select from and allow them to buy that, not the actual top level workwear type. So I'm going to shift this around a little bit just so I've got some more space. So it's not perfect, but this is just going to give us some space to add something. So now we've got our price. Now I'm going to put something in here. This is not going to be the best looking UI. I think thinking about the actual problem, I'd probably have another gallery in here and have little square boxes that you can click on. Maybe I'll work on that after the video, but for now I'm just going to show you how we connect this data together, and then it gives you an opportunity to play around with the UI. So what I'm going to do for now is just inside this container, I'm going to add a drop down. I'm using the new modern controls because I just really like the look of them. Haven't yet found many problems. A lot of people complain and say things don't work, but I've built a fair few apps with them now and not coming across any issues that I can't get over. So let's just set this minimum width a bit lower. And inside there, let's just set a little gap of 16 so we can see it. So now we've got items 1, item 2, item 3, but we actually want to put in the list of items that relate to this work item type. I'm just going to stretch that as well. Get rid of that. It was looking just a little bit too big. So we can select work clothing items. Yeah, let's just replace the columns that are in there. So it's brought in these fields, so title, article number, and the work clothing type ID. So if we look at the drop down, we can see I've got 5, 6, 7, medium, one size small. That's showing me all of those. And the easiest way to do this is we actually just need to filter these down. So we only want the items in the work clothing items. Telesensor is not picking up. Work clothing type ID. So we want the... Ooh. So we've got the work clothing type ID, and we want that to equal this item .id, because that work clothing type ID relates to the work clothing type table. So this item .id. Perfect. So now if we do this, we should see, yep, high visibility jacket only has one size. Work clothes, we have size 5, size 6, size 7. Brilliant. That's almost what we need. Now the last thing we need to do on here is with our button that actually allows people to buy it, we're collecting this item, and this item in this gallery, if we go to the type, is actually the work clothing type, and that's not the item we want anymore. We want the item that's selected in the drop down. So quite simply we can say, this is why you should name all of your components, because I've got to figure out which number of drop down I picked. So drop down canvas 1 is the drop down within this. And this is one thing I actually do love about the galleries is I can say drop down canvas 1. It knows it's the one inside the items, so this is repeated across. It's not going to pick another drop down. It's going to pick the one for the item that I'm clicking on, and we want to send it the selected. We're only going to allow one selected, so we just need the selected item. So now if I scroll down to work gloves 5 and click my button, 6, click my button, we can go over to the variables button on the left here, click our collections, look at our new user SP basket items, and if we view that table we can see it's actually collecting the item. So I've got article number, the work clothing item ID that it relates to, the title, which is 5, and that's the actual size in there. So perfect. So we can now select a size, which gives us the item and the article number. One last thing to fix, which is the actual basket itself. So my basket's completely broken, and that's because it's using my old collection. We're now using the SB basket items. When I change to that, it's going to break even more. I'm going to take the sorting out just to start, because that's going to confuse us when we're seeing errors. So let's have a look at these errors. The group by isn't happy. And why is it not happy? Because my item that's in my basket actually no longer has an image or cost column. Those are on the higher level work item type. So we need to get rid of these. We are not going to be collecting these anymore. What we actually want to have in our group by, we want to have the work clothing type ID, the title. What else? We don't actually need the article number necessarily. We'll bring it in anyway, but likelihood that's something that will just happen in the background. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to give the group a name. So then we want work items. This is going to be the collection of all the items in this collection grouped by the work clothing type ID. Again, our gallery is completely broken, so let's just start working through these errors. So why is it broken? Well, this item now relates to the work clothing item, not the work clothing type. So we actually need to get the work clothing type item. This is really simple. Had it been lookups, it wouldn't be so simple. But doing this, we can use the lookup function. So we want to say in work clothing types, where the ID, or let's start with this one, the work clothing, the ID is equal to this item, which is the work clothing item, work clothing type ID. So go and look that up, then get me the image of that. Straight away, that works. So we can take that lookup and we can spin through the rest of our this items. So actually, I want to get the name of the work clothing type item. That's work gloves. Count rows will come back to. So the removal. So what else we've got in here? Okay, let's look at this. Okay, so now we want the quantity, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add the size in here. So we're going to say the size also is it's actually this item dot title, which is the size. Now we need to count how many of these items we've got in here. So we actually changed the items to work items. So we're just going to count how many work items we've got. So perfect. We've got quantity 1. Just chuck a dash in there. Again, UI UX, this could be sorted out, but we'll get all the functionality in. So we've got work gloves, we've got one of them in there, we've got a size 5. Now we need to add and remove them from our collection. So we're not removing from our old user basket, we're removing from our new user basket. We want to look up in the SP user basket items, and what we can actually do, to be fair, is actually we can just use the ID now, because there's an individual ID for these. This item.id. Actually, we didn't bring ID across. Let's just use the article number, because we know that's unique. So we can say where the article number equals the article number. What we should probably do is just head back over here, because article number, we're putting that in as a string. Now it could be the same, it probably shouldn't, but the one thing we know will be unique will be the ID. So we'll bring that across instead. Let's go back to our back button, and instead of using article number, we'll use ID. We know that's going to be unique. SharePoint always gives us a unique number for that one. So remove where the ID equals this ID, and then for add-in, we want to collect into the new SP user basket item. We want to look up in the work clothing items where the ID equals this item, the ID. So we're just looking up our work clothing items, and we're saying, yep, for this one, which is the work glove that has the specific size, add a new one to the collection. What's left? So we're going to count, we're going to look at the cost. So again, we want to count how many work items have we got in our collection. And now what we need to remember is cost is on the work item type, not on the work item itself. So if we head back over here, grab our lookup, and we can head in here, and we can say, instead of this item, we say, look up the work clothing type and grab the cost. Now, see, I'm not getting any delegation warnings. If you had an actual lookup and you were trying to use the lookup column, you'd run into all sorts of delegation warnings, and you'd have to multiplex out these into ridiculous formulas. This way is so much simpler. I'd recommend you just sort of use this pattern more often with SharePoint. And the last thing is remove if. So actually, we're just going to be removing all these items from the basket where the ID equals this item dot ID. There we go. So I should be able to add more gloves at size 5, more gloves at size 6, remove some at size 6. If I go back to my shop, I can select a 1 size steel toe boot. I should have steel toe boots in there, and I can say, no, I don't want those anymore. We can get them out. That's it. We've pretty much converted it over. There's a few little errors here. Let's look at the last of them. And then we've got a SharePoint list associated Catalogue app. So let's look through these final errors. So what we've got here, this is actually back here. There's a little thing here that counts how many of these items I have in my basket. Now this is an interesting one because I might have multiple different sizes of the same thing, so I can't just count the number of items. I actually need to count how many high visibility jackets across all the items I've got. Now we can do that pretty neatly actually, because we can count and filter from our new user SP basket items, where this item, remember, is the work clothing item type, okay? But in the Cole SP basket items, we relate that ID by using the work clothing type ID. So we can say, count these rows when this item ID equals the work clothing type ID of the user basket items. So let's do that. The only reason that isn't working is there's actually a visible on here. So we're saying the same thing. Let's just go and re-grab the content on that. Because what this is actually doing, it's just saying how many are in there. If it's greater than 0, make it visible. So we can just copy that across and say if there's more than 1, show this button. So let's add a high vis jacket. We should see the 1 pop up. Again, we should see the 5 on the gloves, 1 on the footwear, strangely disappearing, but 1 size on here. So there we go. So we've got a little counter on those. Perfect. That's all fixed up. What's left? Let's see what this error is here. Now that's actually on our basket. Same on here. So now we want to count up the cost of all of our items in our basket. This one's going to be a little bit tricky, but I'm pretty sure we can do it. So it's been a while since I worked with SharePoint Lists, but let's give this a go. So we are now still doing a sum of all the items in my basket items, but I can't get the cost directly from the basket items. They actually don't know how much they cost. The cost is on the item above. That may not be technically correct in most situations, but we'll consider it is for ours. So we need to get the cost from the work item type, not from the work item where we've got it at present. So in here we can put a formula in. So we want to go and look up. We already did this once. Nice big cursor out the way. We're going to go and look up from the work clothing types. Work clothing type ID equals this record.id. Close that. So we expect a number at this point in the formula, correct, because we've looked up the item, but what are we giving it? The cost. And then we need to count the rows in our SP basket items. So there we go. So we're summing from this collection and we're performing a function to go and get the cost. So we can use a completely different set of items and do a lookup. It's going to go and do all of that calculation for us and give us the sum. And then we've just literally counted the rows. Perfect. So this we need one more time because in our basket we have a total here as well. We want to do exactly the same. So let's just drop this in here, get the sum, and get rid of that curly brackets, and we end up with the cost again. And that's it. So we've converted our collection app into SharePoint lists and wasn't as painful as I thought. Luna heard the word SharePoint lists and fell asleep. Now, I've got nothing against SharePoint lists. I used them for many years. There's sometimes a need for it when you don't have a premium license, but you should learn Dataverse. You'll thank yourself and your skill set for it. My next set of videos, I'm going to do exactly the same in the Catalogue app, but we're going to use Dataverse tables, and you'll see how much easier that is to do. Please do subscribe. Please do like comments. I hope, Kiva, that answered your comment. Thank you for it. It's great to come up with problems that need solving and be able to make videos for you guys. So if anyone else has any comments or any suggestions, please do drop them in the comments. The Catalogue app and my solutions are available in my website. Please do consider buying me a coffee just to show your support if you're going to download them. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.